Calvin Reese was 41 years old the night his wife set a plate of roasted chicken in front of him, sat down across the table, and spent 22 minutes describing her new boss as the most visionary man she had ever worked for. He drove a 9-year-old Jeep Cherokee with a cracked side mirror he kept meaning to replace. He wore Dickies to the office on Fridays and kept a pocket square for client days, which were the only days his colleagues ever saw him in anything that suggested what he was actually worth. His wife's coworkers knew him, when they knew him at all, as Dana's quiet husband, the one who did something in real estate. Dana had never corrected them on the something. What Dana did not know, and what her new boss, a man named Trevor Hale, did not know, and what not, one single person at Meridian Group's Nashville headquarters had yet understood, was that the entity that had submitted a letter of intent to acquire the company 8 weeks prior was a private holding company whose beneficial owner was the man eating roasted chicken at Dana's kitchen table. The deal was in diligence. The close date was 31 days out. The purchase price was $14.3 million. Trevor Hale was about to become Calvin Reese's employee. He had no idea Dana was married to the reason the lights were about to change. What happened at that dinner table was the last easy evening Dana Reese would have for a very long time. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The evening light in the kitchen was amber and low, the way it got in October when the sun dropped early and the whole room took on the warmth of something winding down. Calvin was at the counter trimming green beans. Standing in the kitchen he had renovated over 2 summers. The subway tile backsplash he had set himself row by row on a rented float and a borrowed level, the kind of work that required patience more than skill. He had grouted the entire thing on a Saturday while Dana attended a work conference in Memphis, and when she came home, she had said it looked like something from a magazine, and he had said thank you and washed the grout off his hands and made dinner. That had been 3 years ago. He still noticed the lines sometimes, the way the tile met the countertop, with a precision that no one else would look at twice, but that he had made right because it mattered to him that it was right. His uncle Raymond had been a commercial real estate broker in Atlanta for 38 years, the kind of broker who knew every building in a 4-county radius by its bones, not its address. He used to tell Calvin when Calvin was 12 and trailing him through empty warehouses on summer visits, the money's never in the purchase. The money's in what you see before you buy that nobody else thought to look for. Calvin had been a quiet kid and a quieter adult, and he had carried that sentence the way you carry a good tool. Not displayed, just available when the work required it. He had met Dana at an industry mixer in Nashville 9 years ago, back when he was 3 years into his first acquisition, and she was 2 years into a mid-level marketing role at a regional consulting firm. She had been the sharpest person in the room who wasn't trying to appear so, which was the quality he had always found most worth paying attention to. They had talked for 2 hours about the city, about the way Nashville was changing, about what it meant to build something in a place that was still deciding what it wanted to be. He had liked her immediately and directly, without complication. He told her what he did: acquisitions, commercial real estate, small to mid-market business purchases, and she had heard it as a description of someone comfortable and strategic but not remarkable, which was the impression he generally preferred. He was not a man who needed his reflection confirmed by other people's understanding of him. They married in year 2. The house was his, purchased before they met, a modest colonial in a neighborhood east of Nashville that he had bought undervalued and renovated room by room the way he approached every asset, patiently, with attention to the things that didn't show until you looked closely. By year 5, Dana had moved into a director role at Meridian Group, a mid-sized marketing technology firm that Calvin knew by name and had tracked loosely for 2 years. By year 7, she was a senior director, managing a team of 11, and the company had started showing the particular patterns that preceded either a strong growth run or a sale: headcount contraction, executive turnover, a new CFO brought in from outside. Calvin had noted all of this from a professional distance, the way he noted everything he might one day need to understand. He had not mentioned his interest in Meridian to Dana. The deal process required confidentiality. That was standard. What he had not fully accounted for was Trevor Hale. Hale had joined Meridian as chief revenue officer 8 weeks before Calvin's holding company submitted the LOI. He had come from a larger firm in Chicago, arrived in Nashville with the specific energy of a man who had decided this smaller stage was where he would finally be recognized, and had spent his first month reorganizing Dana's department, expanding her responsibilities, and apparently becoming the subject of her professional admiration in a way that had developed a tone Calvin found increasingly worth noting. She had mentioned him first in passing, then regularly, then tonight with a warmth and a detail that were not about work. He just sees things other people don't, she said, refilling her wine. He walked into that Q3 review and reframed the entire conversation in about 4 minutes. Everyone was just, she shook her head. He's something else. Calvin had put down his fork. He had picked it back up. He had said, sounds like a capable guy, and Dana had laughed at the flatness of it and said, that's the understatement of the year. He said nothing else about it. He noted everything. He did not react that evening. He did not react the following morning. He was, by both temperament and training, a man who required the full picture before he formed a conclusion. And the picture he had at the dinner table was incomplete. Incomplete was different from innocent. He knew that. He had spent 20 years in transactions that taught him the distinction between not yet proven and probably not a problem. And the distinction mattered enormously. He started with what he could verify. The Meridian deal was being managed through his holding company, Reese Consolidated, by a transaction attorney named Phyllis Okafor, who had handled 4 of his last 6 acquisitions and who treated confidentiality with the particular seriousness of someone who understood that information was as much an asset as the company it described. He called Phyllis on a Wednesday morning from his office, a converted second bedroom in the Colonial with built-in shelving he had fitted himself and a single window that faced the backyard. I need the full org chart as of current date, he said. Not the one they sent in the data room, the live one. I'll have it today, Phyllis said. He had it by 2 o'clock. Trevor Hale was listed as Chief Revenue Officer, reporting directly to the CEO, with 3 directors beneath him. Dana Reese's name was third on that list. His hands didn't shake. He set the document down on the desk and looked at it for a moment, and then he looked at the tile work in the hallway through the open office door. The pattern he had set 3 summers ago, straight and level and patient. And he thought about what his Uncle Raymond had told him in those Atlanta warehouses. The money was in what you saw before you bought what nobody else thought to look for. He saw it now. He spent the remainder of that afternoon building a secondary file that had nothing to do with the corporate transaction and everything to do with what the transaction had accidentally illuminated. He pulled Dana's work calendar for the month. She kept it shared between their home devices for scheduling purposes and had never changed the setting. He cross-referenced it against 3 weeks of evenings during which she had been, by her account, at late meetings, at a product launch, at a team dinner. The calendar told one story. A hotel charge on their joint card from a Tuesday 3 weeks ago told a different one night downtown Nashville, $218. He did not confront it. He documented it. He opened a second folder beside the Meridian transaction file. He labeled this one full picture. Over the following 6 days, he built the picture with the same methodical care he brought to every acquisition. Not rushed, not emotional, just thorough. He pulled 3 months of the shared card statement and found 2 additional charges he could not place. A restaurant he did not recognize on a Wednesday evening when Dana had said she was working late, and a charge at a downtown parking garage on a Saturday when she had said she was at a friend's bridal shower. He did not call the friend. He did not need to. He simply noted the dates, filed the images, and added them to the timeline he was assembling in the same spreadsheet he used for deal tracking. Because the discipline was the same. You gathered the facts. You established the pattern. You did not move until the picture was complete enough to be conclusive and documented enough to be permanent. By the end of that week, the picture was both. He called his Uncle Raymond that evening. Raymond was 70 now, and no longer brokered properties, but still took Calvin's calls from a porch in Atlanta, with the unhurried attention of a man who understood that the important conversations were always the ones that happened quietly. "Tell me something," Calvin said. "Tell you what?" "Tell me about the time you walked away from the Crestview deal." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "That was 30 years ago." "I know. Tell me anyway." Raymond set his drink down. Calvin could hear the particular sound of ice settling. "The numbers were good, the location was right, but I walked the building twice, and both times something sat wrong and I couldn't name it. Took me 2 weeks to realize the seller had already promised the same property to someone else. He was running a double transaction." Raymond paused. "I walked away before I could prove it. Made the right call." "What made you sure it was the right call?" "Because when something sits wrong twice," Raymond said, "it's not an accident, it's a pattern." Calvin thanked him and said, "Good night." Preparation is the work, not the reaction. The following Friday, his associate Marcus ran the background on Trevor Hale as part of standard acquisition personnel review. Phyllis had requested full executive profiles on all C-suite hires as a condition of diligence. What Marcus returned with in 48 hours was 14 pages that made the hotel receipt look like a footnote. Hale had a civil judgment from 2 years prior in Cook County, Illinois. A former employer had sued for breach of a non-solicitation agreement and won $43,000. He had a pattern of lateral moves, never more than 22 months at any company. He had submitted a compensation history to Meridian's HR that showed a base salary at his prior firm that was $31,000 higher than the W-2 his prior employer had provided to the diligence team. The number was fabricated. Calvin read the 14 pages twice. He was not angry. He was positioned. Those were very different things. He called Phyllis. "The CRO's comp history has a discrepancy," he said. 31,000 documented. Phyllis was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "That's a material misrepresentation in the data room." "Yes, which gives us grounds to renegotiate terms." "Or to restructure the management retention package entirely," Calvin said. "I want a new clause. Any executive whose submitted compensation history cannot be verified against third-party W-2 documentation forfeits their retention bonus upon close." That targets one person. "It applies to everyone equally," Calvin said. "That's the point." Phyllis said she would draft the amendment. He went home that evening and made dinner and sat across from Dana and listened to her describe Hale's latest reorganization initiative with the same careful attention he brought to every document he was still reviewing. He asked one question, which was whether she thought the company was well positioned for the next year. She said she did. She said she thought the new leadership was exactly what Meridian had needed. He said he was glad to hear it and cleared the plates. He said he was glad to hear it and cleared the plates. He washed the dishes by hand, which was a habit he had kept since he was a boy, and he stood at the sink and looked out the kitchen window at the dark yard and the tile lines on the backsplash reflected faintly in the glass. And he thought about his uncle's Crestview building, about the seller who had promised the same property twice, about what it meant to be standing in a transaction you did not fully understand yet. He understood it now. The following morning, he met with his transition attorney, a focused man named Bernard, who handled the employment and organizational restructuring on his acquisitions with a thoroughness that Calvin had come to rely on completely. He laid out the Hale situation without editorializing: the compensation discrepancy, the Cook County judgment, the pattern of short tenures, the personnel file Phyllis had pulled through diligence channels. Bernard reviewed all of it in 20 minutes and looked up with the expression of a man who had seen this before and was not surprised by it. "He's done," Bernard said simply. "The retention clause amendment covers it legally," Calvin said. "I want his departure framed as a structural decision, not a personal one. No public statement about the discrepancy unless he forces the issue." "He won't force it," Bernard said. "Men like this never do. They move to the next city." "He will," Calvin said. Bernard nodded and made a note. "The all-hands announcement. How do you want to play the reveal?" Calvin thought about that dinner table. About 22 minutes of roasted chicken and Trevor Hale's vision and the words something else said with the warmth of a woman who thought she was describing a world her husband could not see into. "Simply," Calvin said, I want to be in the room. She had no idea. The all-hands meeting to announce the close of the Meridian acquisition was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 9 o'clock in the main conference room on Meridian's third floor. Calvin had asked Phyllis to coordinate with the CEO on the announcement format. He had one request, that the buyer be introduced in person rather than disclosed in writing beforehand. The CEO had agreed without asking why. Most CEOs did not ask why when the buyer was about to hand them a check. Calvin arrived at 8:45 in a dark suit and a white shirt and no tie, which was how he dressed when he wanted to be taken seriously without wanting to be looked at. He signed in at the front desk and was shown to a waiting area near the elevators. He sat and looked at his hands and at the hallway and at the framed mission statement on the wall, which said something about innovation and connection that he read once and did not read again. Dana was already in the conference room. He had seen her car in the lot. At 9 o'clock, he walked in. The room held 31 people. He recognized the CEO from the transaction calls. He recognized Phyllis standing at the side wall. He recognized the new CFO from the executive profiles. He found Dana's face in the second row. She was turned toward the front, a notepad open on her knee. And the moment the door opened and she registered who had walked through it, her expression passed through three distinct states in approximately 2 seconds: recognition, confusion, and something that had no clean name but lived in the space between those two. She looked at him the way you look at a wall when you realize it has been load-bearing the entire time. Trevor Hale was in the front row. He was the kind of man who always sat in the front row. The CEO stood and introduced Calvin as the founder and principal of Reese Consolidated, the acquiring entity, and said the words that CEOs say at these moments: excited for the partnership, grateful for the process, confident in the path ahead. Calvin thanked him. He looked at the room with the same steady attention he had brought to every building his uncle had ever walked him through. I'll keep this brief, Calvin said. I don't acquire companies to change what's working. I acquire companies to protect what's been built and remove what's been undermining it. He looked at the CEO. You'll receive individual meeting requests from my transition team by end of day. Those meetings will determine retention decisions. He paused. I believe in being clear, he said. So I want to be clear about one thing before we close. During diligence, we identified a material discrepancy in a compensation history submitted by a member of this leadership team. That individual will not be receiving a retention offer. The details will be handled privately and professionally. But I want everyone in this room to understand that the standard going forward is accuracy. Everything else we can work with. The room was very quiet. Trevor Hale did not move. His posture changed slightly, the way the surface of water changes when something shifts below it. Calvin did not look at him directly. He did not need to. He looked instead at Dana, who was looking at him with the expression of someone recalculating the load-bearing capacity of a wall she had been leaning against for years. That's all, Calvin said. Phyllis will take questions. He walked to the side of the room and stood beside the window and looked at the Nashville skyline and let the silence do the work that silence does when the room finally understands what was always true. He had not raised his voice. He had not needed to. Hale had not turned around. He sat very still in the front row with the particular stillness of a man doing rapid arithmetic and arriving at a number he did not like. Phyllis moved toward him with a single document: the retention clause amendment, the W-2 discrepancy summary, and the termination terms, and set it in front of him without fanfare, the way you place a bill on a table after a meal that is finished. Calvin watched none of it. He was already looking out the window. The building was already built. It had been built for years. They were only now seeing what it was standing on. 16 months later, the kitchen backsplash still looked like something from a magazine, or so the new owner said when she toured the Colonial before making her offer. Calvin had accepted it without negotiating, because the number was right, and because he had already found the Craftsman house 3 miles east with the wide backyard and a mature pecan tree, and the screened porch he was going to rebuild from the studs up over the coming spring. The divorce had moved with the clean efficiency of a process between two people who understood, once it was placed plainly between them, that the accounting was more important than the performance. His attorney had been precise. Dana's had been adequate. It was done in 9 months. He had heard through Phyllis, who heard through the Meridian CFO, that Trevor Hale had relocated to Cincinnati. The civil judgment from Cook County had been republicized in the context of his dismissal from Meridian, and a second former employer had come forward with a similar non-solicitation claim. The Nashville market was not large, and the business community in it had a memory for the kind of discrepancy that Calvin's diligence team had surfaced and documented and placed in a permanent file. Hale had sent one message through an intermediary, something about understanding and moving forward. Calvin had not responded. There was nothing to respond to. The document spoke for itself, the way documents always did when they were accurate and complete and properly filed. Dana had stayed at Meridian through the transition. The reorganization that Calvin's team implemented had elevated her department and clarified her actual scope of authority, which had been quietly minimized under Hale's structure. She was, by every account, performing well. He had not spoken with her since the legal process concluded. He wished her no harm. He wished her, specifically, the clarity that came from no longer being in a room where the walls were not what she thought they were. He had a woman named Josephine in his life now, a landscape architect from Memphis, who had come to Nashville for a project commission and had stayed for reasons she described as hard to name precisely, which Calvin had found to be a satisfying answer. She understood load-bearing things by profession, and she asked good questions by nature, and on Sunday mornings she sat on the porch with coffee and the quiet ease of someone who did not need the space filled. He appreciated that more than he knew how to say, so he said it plainly one evening, and she had looked at him and said, "I know," and that had been enough. The pecan tree in the backyard dropped the last of its leaves in November, and Calvin raked them into the beds he was preparing for spring planting, working in the early gray light with a methodical patience that had always been, in the end, his most reliable asset. His uncle Raymond called that Saturday morning, which was a thing Raymond did when the season changed, just to mark it. "How's the new place?" Raymond asked. "Solid," Calvin said. "Bones are right. I can work with the rest." "That's the whole thing," Raymond said. It was. It always had been, and Calvin Reese had always known it. The money was never in the purchase. It was in what you saw before you bought it, in the things that nobody else had thought to look for, in the years of quiet attention that looked from the outside like patience, and were, from the inside, something more deliberate than that. He pressed the rake through the last of the leaves and let the morning come in the way good mornings did, without asking permission, without announcement, without requiring anything from him at all. Simply present. Simply enough, freedom was the real currency. Everything else was just transaction. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.